the last time we've done some workshops at CAPLA, a much smaller group. So it's awesome to see you all here. How many of you are from post-secondary colleges, universities? Anyone from universities? Yay! Agencies, community agencies? Okay, regulatory bodies? Great. Government?
Not so many.
Okay. Welcome. Anyone I missed? Okay, what I'd like you to do, it's going to be the interactive portion. I'd like you to stand up, please. I know. You just got comfortable. Okay, what I'd like you to do is, if you are working in a job, your current role, if it is in the field in which you trained, have a seat. If your job description requires the degree in which you trained or the diploma, have a seat. Okay, that's actually all right. Okay, everyone can have a seat. That's actually a lot more people than I thought this would be. I asked the same question at a what are we now? Colleges and Institutes Canada, CICAN. It's the former Association of Community Colleges, Canadian Community Colleges. I asked this question a few years ago, and of all of the senior folks in the room, not one person had a degree, funny enough, from a program that gave them the training to become a VP, or a dean, or a president. And so here we are, we're talking about education, credentials, we're talking about pathways to credentials, and we're talking about transfer process, transfer credit. And yet, every single person in the room was really using PLAR to advance their careers. And yet, it's such a tiny little insignificant conversation that we're having, at least in the Ontario college system. And so it's just, I just wanted to see here, what that reflected. So it's interesting that there are pathways out there that do lead to your current roles. For me, my name is Jan Carter, and I'm from George Brown College, and I have probably had about 30 different jobs in about, 10 different industries, maybe 5 of which could have led to a career, none of which would have led to this career. So I am the manager of immigrant education at George Brown College, and I am the manager of prior learning assessment and recognition, PLAR, at the college. And that's college-wide, not just for immigrant populations. And neither of those jobs existed before 2008. So, I couldn't have trained for them. And in fact, the only reason I am in them is because 2 colleges, which shall be unnamed, declined my PLAR applications back in 2000, based on probably about 10 years worth of work that I had done up until that point in another profession, in graphic design, in photography, and media communications. I would have had to start from scratch. So, listening to the gentleman earlier, it is absolutely, I'm here because I had to pick a different pathway. All right, thank you. So I will let Fabiola introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. It's safe to talk to me. I have a coffee. So, my name is Fabiola Murphy, and I am the PLAR assistant at George Brown College. I am also the coordinator for the college teachers training program. I've been working as a PLAR assistant since 2014 at college. And I was 2 days in the job when they threw me into the CAPLA conference in Ottawa in 2014. Quiet experience. And I became familiar with PLAR, and I really fell in love with it. I am a Canadian born in Mexico. My original training was in the hospitality industry, which I never liked. And I worked there, I did the job, and I did what I had to do, but never liked it. I came to Canada, and I started working with immigrants and refugees and women in the social sector. And finally, I became trained as a social service worker. I graduated from Seneca College in 2012. And I'm no longer working directly in the trained profession that I chose. But I'm using the skills and the knowledge that I learned into this job, working with immigrants and other adult learners who are looking for pathways to advance their career and their education or their employment. And we support them from the PLAR office to attain those goals.
Thanks, Fabiola. So a lot of Fabiola's frontline day-to-day work is advising students through the process. So the way it works at George Brown and many other Ontario colleges is we have either part-time staff who are student-facing, and so are available during the school hours to help navigate this process. Who do I contact if I want to do PLAR? They've given me this sheet. What am I supposed to do with it? Who do I have to see, and what's the timeline? So Fabiola works with mostly students. The thing is that students will come in and they'll say, I've asked for PLAR and I've been referred here. Somebody told me you'll do the assessment. Now, that may be the case in other organizations, but it's not at George Brown. We are the process. We're the back end people that grease the wheels and get things moving. But the assessors reside firmly in the faculty areas. They're the subject matter experts. So more and more, both Fabiola and I are pulled into meetings where we are educating the faculty as to what the PLAR process is. In Ontario, there was about 3 years of funding back in the late 90s from the government to implement PLAR practices, and then the funding stopped. So what we've had is faculty members who received that training or who were part of legacy training who really believe in the social justice aspect of it and continue to do it at the college system. For everyone else who has come in new, it's simply a 2-page ministry mandate that we will do PLAR, but there's very little to support us. So it's mostly, going to Loyalist's website and going to Athabasca's website and copying what they have there and figuring out, okay, so what are these challenges and, what are the rules and what do we do? And to that end, when Fabiola and I went to the CAPLA conference, where the new manual was at 2015, and we saw the 9 guiding principles and how it works integrated with the various other steps, we were like, oh, this is awesome. So, we looked at a few of them. We thought, we do that already. Okay, because we've been working at George Brown since about 2012. And we've been calling other colleges. We've been really trying to figure out how to put into place practices that align with policies, or at least good practices, and trying to get through the system. And really, the barriers are not the students. The students are coming in with some fabulous experiences. The barriers are on our side. It's a variety of issues. So just to give you some context, we'll give you a really quick level review of what George Brown is, for those of you who don't know. Can you? All right, so George Brown College, we have, where's my little, yep. I had a number. That was what I was fussing over there. It's in the fine print. We have about 162 programs in our full-time area, and in the full-time programs, we have 29,000 students, over 29,000 students, and in those full-time programs, we have about just over 3,000 students taking courses part-time. We also have in our continuing education, we have about 65,000 registrations each year. So we're one of the large urban, downtown colleges, up there with the polytechnics and the bigger colleges across the country. We can skip through this one. But what that means is over the last 50 years, we have grown exponentially. We've grown on multiple campuses. There are campuses that no longer exist that George Brown started at, and then we've acquired buildings along the way. And as a downtown college, we can't just say, hey, let's build a new building on this area. What we do is we rent out a floor here, a portion of a floor over there, and then we have to start retrofitting everything. So in order to accomplish that, to meet the demands, we have grown in bits and pieces and silos. And we see that reflected in the way that credit transfer and the recognition of prior learning happens throughout the college. Everyone has been responsible. It's like we have 162 different companies. And so we have rules and practices and policies for those at that program level. And they're born out of a genuine need to and desire to be there for the students and to support student success. But as we start to take a look at how do we provide consistency, and we started using these principles, all of a sudden we realize, all right, well, how do we work with everyone to find some way to ensure that consistency? So for today's session, what we said we would do is take a look at our goal is 3 learning outcomes. So identifying the barriers, and learning about options to reduce or eliminate those barriers, and then have you brainstorm anything else that possibly can be done. There's some precedence to this work. For about 3-4 years between 2012-2015, there was a group called the Ontario College PLAR Network. We were trying to pull together PLAR practitioners throughout the college system across the entire province. And we kind of have bits and starts because, and you probably can think of the reasons why, but I'll give you a couple of them, and then I'm going to have you sit down at your table and brainstorm. All right? So if you want to, do you want to read those out?
So
Just a few.
these barriers, we're going to identify, as Jan said, identify the barriers that can exist within the administrative infrastructure of a community college in Ontario. And what we have identified in our practice is the lack of awareness of the RPL process as a pathway tool. A lot of people within the college, within the faculty, don't know what RPL means, don't know what PLAR is, and they certainly do not know how to assess. They cannot pass that information either to the students. So if the students don't know that their knowledge can be recognized, they end up duplicating the learning. We are also concerned about the quality assurance and the alternative assessments and how the students are being assessed on their learning, their knowledge. We also have identified a little setback while implementing the quality in the PLAR assessments also. We might touch base a little bit on that. The lack of funding or the structure to support the assessments. And when they are developing new curriculum, new assessments, new courses, it's a little bit easier now to also develop assessments and tools for prior learning. But for those courses that are already established and that are not currently in review, then it's complicated and it's costly, and faculty do not have the financial incentive to actually do that. And some other courses don't want to invest the money in building those assessing tools because they might not have any demand for recognition, for assessment and recognition of prior learning, and then it will be kind of like a waste. So it's also very confusing on determining what's the eligibility for students, and those are the things that we have been trying to implement in advising the students and advising the faculty and the staff across the college on how to assess or how to determine if a person is eligible for the recognition of their prior learning. We start with the students asking them to do their homework, look at the learning outcomes of the course, make sure they understand what it's entitled, what they need to demonstrate, and then they use a self-assessment tool that I think it was built in collaboration with other practitioners in Ontario. They use this assessment so they can self-reflect on their knowledge. They know that they can demonstrate later the learning outcomes of the course. And then if they are satisfied with their own self-reflection, they can look for the program coordinator, who will be sometimes the assessor or the person in charge to point them in the right direction with the subject matter expert, who is going to determine time frames and what is, if it is an exam, a written exam, a practical exam, a verbal exam, a portfolio, or a combination of both, and also determine if this student needs more learning in addition, and we can do a hybrid assessment and things like that. So that's the piece of advising that we are trying to implement, but where we find various barriers in the past.
Anyone experienced any of these barriers? All right. Are those the only barriers? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you 5 minutes to talk in your table. There's notepads on each of the tables, courtesy of the Grand Hotel. If somebody could take some notes and then just at the end leave them, we'll collect everything, and what we'll do is we'll populate these slides that come past here, and then we'll send them to CAPLA for posting. So we'll capture the ideas that come out of here, all right? So if you flip the slide, all it says is other. So brainstorming session, 5 minutes. Okay, let's finish up. And if you haven't been taking notes, if you can please take notes, that would be great. All right, Harji. You can continue the brainstorming as we go through.
We have prizes.
All right, if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. Thank you. Okay, one thing I'd like to do before we move on is I'd just like to showcase Fabiola. She's going to get very embarrassed, but this is actually her first time presenting to a conference group. Yeah. And so she confessed she was very nervous, and yet throughout the last couple of weeks, I kept saying, you have the skills. Here's where you've demonstrated the skills before. Here's where you've done it. And she wasn't believing me.
I was just thinking when she was presenting, how professional. She's such a professional presenter.
Oh, thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you.
That's even more embarrassing.
But it's so funny because, do we even think about what we do as it applies to us? She's, I haven't done this before. All right, let's talk about PLAR.
Yeah, just the things that I do every day.
Yeah, what do you do every day? Yes, exactly. All right, so can somebody throw out some ideas? What are some of the other barriers that we face in the administrative function? Oh, sorry?
Your microphone.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay,
got
okay,
it.
Got it. Yeah, I was like, huh?
I'm like, what? All right, so Fabiola will run around and give you, but what are some of the other barriers?
I'm sitting here with a very intelligent group here. One issue that was raised was that many programs, especially some of the most popular, are full right away, and so faculty are resistant to even considering students outside of that one group to consider students involved with PLAR.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes they are not even considered like students, right? They are not in class.
Our group is also very intelligent. Just put that out there. And one of the points that was brought up was the lack of faculty collaboration in the process. So even between the faculty, really it's all just kind of done in silos. So they're not even collaborating. And again, we're not sure what the quality is there in the assessment.
Yeah, some programs meet as a program multiple times throughout the term, and they talk about the students as a group holistically, and they talk about challenges, the student success issues, the early alerts. And then there's other programs, and I taught in one, where I didn't know who else was teaching the other subjects in the program because we never had any meetings. And so issues I was having, I would convey to my coordinator. But I don't know if that was getting to the other folks to say, oh, how is this student doing? And yeah, good one.
One of the things we talked about at our table was just inconsistencies for how PLAR is handled, especially in a large organization. I know at Fanshawe we're a large organization with multiple faculties across the college, and each faculty kind of handles PLAR differently. So then if faculty do talk to each other, it's, how do you handle that? Am I even supposed to be doing this? Is this my job? So it's kind of sometimes not the most positive experience when it's handled differently in a whole bunch of different areas within a same organization.
Yeah, when I first started at George Brown, we had 7 different PLAR application forms, all asking for different information, all charging different fees, and the assessments would have been pass-fail, didn't matter what it was for, and of course then when the registrar's office tried to upload the grade, it didn't fit into the grading scheme. It was a bit of a, it took us about 3 years before we erased 90% of the renegade PLAR application forms, but we still get 1 or 2, don't we?
We get 1 or 2 once in a while, and all we do now is just pick up the phone and talk directly to either faculty or program coordinators, and we try to be very diplomatic, but it took us a while to actually change that. It took us a while to build up a process that now it's starting to pick up better. And now it's everybody on the same page. If they don't know what to do, if they have questions, they know they go to the PLAR office, they can get answers, and then we are all on the same page. Our goal at the end is to support the students, the learners, and that their knowledge is recognized.
All right, 1 or 2 more barriers before we start looking at the opportunities.
The one thing I noticed is that sometimes when a student comes in to PLAR, they come in with skills that are very close to our vocational learning outcomes or program learning outcomes, but they don't match the courses. So when we look at the courses, even though the person may be an expert in the field and that's what they want to end up with, we have courses that don't necessarily match the same learning outcomes. And so it gets confusing even for the assessor or the advisor to say, well, I know you can do the job, and that's why we have you take this course, because it's going to help you get those skills. But you have to retake the course just so we can validate that you've taken that course. So that's where it gets a little confusing, I think.
Yeah. 1 more?
It's also flexibility.
Over the back. Thanks.
I'm a little bit hesitant to answer this question because your question is talking about Ontario, and I'm from Alberta.
Oh.
So I will speak in the Alberta experience. Is that okay?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Okay.
The reason we framed it as Ontario is because this is what I know. And this is so, Fabiola and I could talk about the challenges we face in Ontario because we've been asking Ontario colleges this for years. We are so impressed with colleges in other provinces and some of the ministry supports in provinces like Alberta.
Okay. Well, one of the institutional barriers that we have in itself is lack of knowledge on what PLAR is all about. Prior to coming here, I didn't know anything about PLAR. And I just realized I have 2 of my colleagues here and from the same college. But we are from totally different departments. So it sounds like the college itself has not made an effort to train us or to advertise or to give information about PLAR. So that in itself is an institutional barrier. The second one is the actual administration of what PLAR is about across different professions. And one of the main one is the accrediting body of those institutions. Do they actually recognize or know what PLAR is all about? So that's another one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, PLAR is a secret, yeah?
one of the other things that was brought up at our table was the time commitment that's involved. You know, it takes students, you know, sometimes weeks and weeks to, you know, if we're talking about a portfolio, it could be a month to fill that out. It takes then time for the assessor to get the time to assess it and then to get those reports back. And in the meantime, that student is, you know, thinking that they had this time to devote to other courses, but they've had to be attending the course, and on it goes. So the time commitment can be huge.
Yes, thank you. These are all great points. Some of the other barriers we have is inconsistency in the application of assessments. So we have multiple sections, multiple professors / subject matter experts, and they've been asked individually, and they're in a program where they don't coordinate with the entire team. So one does a challenge exam and one says, sure, a portfolio, but really what the portfolio turns out to be is a resume. And so the professor says, oh, I asked them a bunch of questions. Like, they've done the work. Like, they've worked for 5 years.
Fortunately, not anymore. But we did have those.
So at one point, I think it was the registrar or associate registrar from Norquest, I think, who coined the term stealth PLAR, where what professors would do is they would get asked about, could I potentially do the PLAR? They'd talk to the student. They'd ask some really good, insightful questions and think, this student knows it. And they'd say, you know what? I don't want to go through the PLAR process. It's too involved. I don't even know what it is. You really seem like you know what you're doing. Come back for the final exam. So you don't have to attend class. Come back for the final exam and, you know, do the mark. Or they would say, 80? Okay. You know, you seem, but, you know, it's based on, you laugh, but in some cases when the professors would explain it to me, it sounded reasonable. You know, they were thoroughly knowledgeable about their field. They know exactly the company or the organization where the student has worked. They know, in fact, their supervisors, and they know exactly what that job demands because many of the graduates start with those jobs. And so a few questions, maybe, you know, half an hour discussion, and they really do believe, yes, the student can demonstrate the outcomes of this particular course, and I'm confident that, you know, they're around the 80-85%. You know, so it's years of experience. Now, what happens when we have a professor who's brand new, who doesn't have the industry contacts, who doesn't have that? Maybe they do a challenge exam. Or we get audited. Well, so
That's a thread we tend to use.
yeah, or we get audited.
And public shame. If this comes to the public and if a news outlet learns about it or a newspaper, how is it going to look that George Brown College is assessing this way? So we have used that one too. Sometimes you have to be creative.
Turnover of faculty, lack of actionable learning outcomes. So in some of our older programs where they were developed and, you know, again, by industry professionals who are not educational professionals, who are all about the learning outcomes, as we go to do program reviews and we look at the curriculum development and the assessment process, you know, some of the learning outcomes were a little too vague. And so it was, you know, we'll know about the industry. All right, how are you going to test that? You know, how will you assess that? So, you know, there's some work to be done, but it's yet another barrier. So who's going to do that work? How do you pay for it? You know, all of that kind of stuff. And then buy-in from faculty. Because some of the faculty were doing resume equals PLAR, other faculty thought, there's no way I'm doing PLAR. It is not quality. It is not ensuring that the student is leaving this course with the outcomes they need, with the learning they need to be successful in, you know, if they're PLARing George Brown 101 with a resume, then when they get into George Brown 102, they won't be successful, and it's because I gave them the pass that we heard about earlier, the, you know, did I sneak my way into this? So all of those barriers, you know, there's many more, I'm sure, administratively, but if you could just note them down as we go through. What we'll do is we'll start looking at the 9 guiding principles, and we're going to do some brainstorming, not just about the challenges, but how do we get past them? And in George Brown, we've been doing this for about 5 years now, trying to get past them. With the manual coming out in 2015, it's given us far more leverage and so much validity and credibility because we're back-end administration and support. So when we're talking to programs, faculty, deans, they're like, well, who are you to tell us what to do in our program? We're like, well, here are some really good, valid, learning-based, knowledge, skills, aptitudes that have gone through these different educational, the province, et cetera, all of a sudden now we have some research behind us and we are speaking with, credibility. And that's really helped us in the last 2 years. So we take a look at the 9 guiding principles, and we went over them really quickly earlier with Mark. Accessibility. So accessibility, response to applicant questions, cost efficient to both the applicant and the organization, timely in both frequency of assessment and gap filling, and adult learner-centered, voluntary, available, and inclusive of abilities and differences. Whose PLAR process fulfills this one? Fabiola, do you want to, what do you think about George Brown's?
It's accessible, first of all, because we have a mandate. So it's accessible to everybody. Most of our courses are PLAR eligible, and the ones that are not eligible require to have a written explanation clearly outlining why the course is not eligible, sometimes for safety reasons, sometimes because of the cost, but it has to clearly identify what are the reasons behind saying, no, this course is not PLAR eligible. When course outlines are now built into the system and they are upload, if you click yes, it's fine, PLAR eligible, nothing happens, but if you click no, then you do have to explain why not. So it's like a bump in the road and say, hey, step back, think about what you're doing, why not? Talk to the dean, talk to other professors, talk to other faculty. So we are eliminating the accessibility barrier that way for that.
Sorry, as part of that process, do they also then have to upload the assessment tool? How they're assessing the PLARs? No. So it's just PLAR, yes or no, and if it's no, a rationale for why.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
We, unfortunately, we're not there yet.
I'm not sure we'll ever be there. I mean, we don't upload the assessments for the courses, the in-class courses. Right. So there's 3 ways right now that our students can acquire credits. They can do the in-class process, they can do an online process, or they can do a PLAR process. And so with the in-class or the online, they are learning new information and they're being assessed on that learning. On the PLAR process, we're assessing them on the learning that they've acquired previously. So we talk about it as just it's a different process. For some reason, probably the mid-2000s, it seems a lot of people, at least in Ontario, got the impression that PLAR was a program, that I enroll in PLAR and I do PLAR instead of over here. And that confusion seems to reign really embedded in programs where we get sent their students who expect that we've developed assessments sort of like we're an additional Con Ed department where we offer courses and credits, and maybe they'll accept it, maybe they won't. I'm not sure, that predates me. But for us, one of the worst parts about being accessible is it's not cost efficient. But organizationally, it's not cost efficient. So for the student, we're about $120, and we have very compassionate chairs and coordinators who, if the student really financially can't do it, they'll find ways for the department to cover it, or they'll find ways for a scholarship or a bursary to cover it. It doesn't happen a lot, but we do have our chairs really understand some of those financial hardships. Maybe it's because we're a large urban college, but the cost efficiency on the back end. Think about the time that faculty members will spend trying to pull this information from the student to determine eligibility, and then create the assessment if they haven't already got a process in place for PLAR assessing, and then marking or grading the assessment, whether it's by demonstration. We could be talking thousands of dollars. And when we look at PLAR eligibility of the course and we say, is the course PLAR eligible? for our dental folks, they say, well, if you can afford, to open up the laboratory and bring in all of the professors in the program who typically assess weekly, the critical skills, then we're happy to do it. That'll be about $18,000. Not affordable for us, not affordable for the student. Nursing, if you can provide us with a way that we can bring in, all the nursing, the proctors at the hospitals, we're happy to do so, but you've got to show us the money. We don't have that in place. So there are programs and courses where there is no PLAR for safety reasons, construction, and for financial reasons. So we can do some PLAR and figure out a way to make it cost effective. But for the most part, because 90% of our programs, maybe even 95% at this point, have field education embedded within them. It's really difficult to find ways to assess the learning that somebody has done previously, especially if they're still in the applicant side. And so that's one of the things that we're finding is a real challenge.
But it's also a good part that it's accessible for the students because they all receive the same information. So they are, in that case, it is accessible. So there are bad things, barriers that we all face, but there are also good things that we have been able to change kind of quickly, because we were talking about 5 years. It's not that long. So we have been able to change that. Like, all information comes from one place, and it's only the PLAR office, and everybody is trying to buy into it. So it's that is accessible for the learners as well.
Yeah. So really what we do is when we go to meet with coordinators, with faculty, with support staff who are supporting the faculty, with the registrar's office, with the financial office, with the admissions office, we literally bring the manual with us and we walk through, all right, accessible, so timely, how long might it take? Why are you declining the PLAR, or why are you asking for a previously labeled course not PLAR eligible to be PLAR eligible? These are the questions that we need you to ask and you to answer so that we can be consistent in the way that we communicate out to potential applicants. But the 9 principles honestly address every single thing, and really I think it would work for all organizations, large or small. Some of these you may nail immediately just because of your daily practice. And some of them you think, ooh, okay, well, that's a challenge for us. And in some cases, and what we've learned through attending the CAPLA conferences and the FNTI Belleville Loyalist PLA conference over the years, is that provinces tend to have similar, because we're under a ministry and we have certain rules. And then some of the smaller colleges have different challenges and opportunities than some of the larger colleges. We all seem to face the same things. So the opportunities here to collaborate and to contribute is amazing, because you're not alone, but B, oh, you did that at your college, got it. All right. So consistency. Any questions about accessibility? Our biggest thing. What's your biggest thing about accessibility? The cost, or
Knowing it's there.
knowing it's there? Okay. I think. There's one down here about transparency that I've got those notes. But there's a reason why we don't promote PLAR publicly, frequently, consistently, and loudly. All right, consistency. I think some of the challenges have already been put out there. But what are some of the ways that we can address consistency? Is there a group in your college who would be more naturally responsible for consistency in the development and the application of PLAR process assessments than other departments?
I work for Thompson Rivers University Open Learning, which is kind of like the distance education portion of TRU. And we have a PLAR department that just oversees everything to do with open learning PLAR. So it's awesome. We have that consistency. We, my colleague and I are advisors, and we have our director, and we have our faculty member who's, on board with PLAR, and we work as a team to ensure that consistency. Now, the campus aspect of PLAR, not so much. So we have instructors who oversee the PLAR process, and because it's a younger demographic, there's not as much PLAR that takes place on campus, but definitely that consistency isn't there on the campus portion of TRU. So.
I think, to use the example, Jan, that you talked about, where the candidate would go to the professor would hear what the candidate had to say about the learning outcomes and whether they've acquired them in their non-formal, informal learning. And, okay, I'll give you the 80 or whatever. I think that there's a lot to be said for having a professional conversation with a candidate. I think it takes it to where it's real. It values what that learner knows and can do. And in the interest of continuous improvement, maybe the consistency might be to suggest, and I'm not sure who does the suggesting, whether or not that's part of your role at George Brown, but whether it could just be consistency around the questions that are asked of clients who come to me. So I will consistently ask these questions which relate to the learning outcome. So the consistency might be acquired in other ways, but at least it's moving towards continuous improvement and making it less subjective, perhaps.
I'll let Fabiola speak very briefly because we'll need to move on, but if you can speak about the development of the PLAR Advising Guide for faculty. Do you know the genesis of that?
Not that much. But yes, we have developed an advising guide for faculty, for staff, where it outlines what the roles of everybody, what their particular roles are. It starts with everybody. So the student, the learner may approach the registrar's office, student services, faculty, program coordinators, PLAR office, whomever. They will get the same information because now it's embedded in this advising guide. And the student is going to be asked, again, first of all, to do their homework and look at their learning outcomes and see if they can demonstrate that. The subject matter experts their role will be to assess and to make sure that it's the quality of the assessment is rigorous, that it's consistent as well, and that it's also fair for a student and fair for other students who are also in class, because they will be earning the same grade. It's not different than the students who are attending classes. They are earning exactly the same grade. It's not a pass or fail, or it's not like maybe yes or no. And it also, it's consistent because it aligns with the rubric that other students are being assessed against. What else? I'm kind of stuck.
I'll jump in. So,
there you go.
B, of the 9 guiding principles, B, consistency. We've just spent 5 years on this. I have just spent 5 years on this at George Brown College. I came to one of my first CAPLA conferences and I attended the one-day intro to RPL with Deb Blower and came away with all of these, the training, the tools, all of this. This is how we do it. And I went back and nobody talks to each other. 7 different application forms, different processes, different practices, and no one really has any consistency. I thought this would be dealt with by the next year. And what's really had to happen is we spent 2 years, George Brown, Sheridan, I think someone from Durham and someone from Confederation College, we worked together to develop this PLAR advising guide for faculty that included best practices, that included sample forms that seemed to be the best of what we looked at. We looked at Athabasca, we looked at Red River, the former SIAS, now Saskatchewan Polytechnic, and we cobbled together what seemed to be the best practices, the sample assessment formats and common. So we've put this all together as a guide. And then whenever we had someone come to us saying, "Blah, this is so different and it's going to be onerous," and it's just like, it's not. It looks exactly like what you do when you go through curriculum development and planning assessments for the in-class portion. If you create 5 assessments for in-class, you create 1 for PLAR, and that's the curriculum development that needs to happen. So over the course of the 5 years, our curriculum developers and our instructional designers who are embedded within a department we call academic excellence or academic quality. It's the teaching and learning function. And they now routinely, as a part of the curriculum development of a new course or the review of an old course, now they're asking about the PLAR. It wasn't a practice before because it was just not on the radar. And so now we have that. The registrar's office, now that we have one form, when they get an old form, they turn, the person away and say, you need to get the correct form. Just go upstairs, PLAR office will help you. We have the self-assessment that was developed as part of the coordination with all the faculty. We workshopped this at a number of faculty meetings, coordinators meetings, faculty meetings, the Chairs Academy from 2011 through to 2013. And then we launched it. It's just a 2-page document that says, and this is, I think, embedded in a lot of the RPL work that Red River College has done. Take a look at the learning outcomes and rate yourself, how you feel you would be able to meet those. Now take a look at the way that you're going to be evaluated. Case studies, reflective papers, and really think about, where did you learn this? Which job did you learn this at? And identify that. And that's that first step. Before the student goes to the faculty member, they need the homework that Fabiola refers to. The student needs to not just look at the title and say, Marketing 101, I can do that, and then go and ask for it. They have to look at what's covered in that course. And so is their learning at the level that would be expected and that can be tested for? And is their learning, oh my goodness, we flew by through nuts. All right. Okay, let's spend the last 7 minutes. Okay, I'll go through this really quickly. Respectful. Guiding principle is respect. And that's actually something that we haven't had any challenges with. Even when we have faculty members declining requests for PLAR because it's too hard, there's no money, whatever, for the most part, we've always seen them treat the applicant with respect, our departments with respect, but I can see where in the past there's been some challenges where people thought we were usurping the faculty's area on developing assessments. And so you have to make, this is part of the making yourself known and making people aware of what your role is as an assessor or an advisor or just a coordinator for PLAR, to make sure that we're not being perceived as taking work away and doing work that isn't in our purview. Validity, all right. Assessments align with the expected measures for the course itself. This is the one that baffles us because, for me, I'm not a curriculum developer, but we take a look at the course outlines, and when the course outlines have good learning outcomes, really well articulated, and the assessment methods are really articulated well, it's clear to the student, to how to identify and how to, put their case together to say, hey, I'm eligible. And the goal of that self-assessment is to reduce the amount of time the faculty member plays 300 questions, so that the eligibility can be determined fairly easily with, a great informed meeting at which the student can decide and make an informed choice. Do I follow the PLAR process or do I do in class or online? And the faculty member can determine, I don't recommend you follow this process and here's why. Or yes, we've examined this, we've looked at it. So validity, we have the processes in place at the college level, but for some reason there seems to be this sticking thing that we have to create new for PLAR, new for recognition of prior learning, and yet we already look at this. So, and we already do this daily. So it's just to look back here and to work with faculty members. When we talk about the quality that's already built into the assessment process in the program, all of a sudden it's like, oh, and that's been really helpful. All right, what do we have after this? Flexible, rigorous, transparent, and professionally supported.
Flexibility is hard for us.
Flexibility is hard for us. Although, again, coming back to the validity, when we have a look at the existing assessments, pretty much most of those can be modified very slightly to accommodate learners with prior learning in a way that they can demonstrate and they can earn the grades at the level at which they wish to. Professionally supported. So the biggest challenge that we have is, and this is, I guess will be my last bit, we have a skills gap in that our professors in the full-time programs with the traditional demographic direct from high school, we're teaching people who are learning new skills, and then we send them to fieldwork where they're practicing those new skills, and then we bring them back to the college and we test them on the knowledge and the skills, and then we graduate them into entry-level jobs where they then use those skills and then move on in their career. So we have professors who work at that entry-level skills area, whether it's entry-level to a really entry-level job, or it's a post-grad certificate going into a particular profession at a particular level. This is that level that they work at. What they don't do and what they don't assess every single day is they don't assess 15 years learning of somebody who started at the entry level and then worked their way up over the last 15 years, in which time we've had these things called computers come in, and cell phones and mobile. The world has changed. And so the challenge for us is how do we train our faculty members to assess learning that people have maybe forgotten or they never went through because it didn't exist, and look at those program outcomes, which I think was mentioned earlier. People meet the program outcomes, but they may not meet the course-by-course outcomes. So that's still one of our biggest challenges. But we continue to use the manual, the CAPLA manual, and everything to try to find ways that we can bridge that. But it's still a work in progress. But that's training for us. The last piece is the opportunities. I know you all probably would come up with this when we did the brainstorming. But because we don't do PLAR for 10 years or 15 years experience, who do you think does? Okay, the employment counselors in the group. Who does PLAR every single day?
The employment counselors.
The employment counselors with the clients and the employers who are doing the hiring. So every college program has a program advisory council or a committee. They have these employers who sit there and provide input on curriculum, on up-to-date everything. We need to learn to use them because they're the ones who can tell us what 15 years experience in the field looks like and how we take someone who has that 15 years who is coming into a program because they want to advance, but now they have to have a diploma and blah, blah, blah. We have such an opportunity as educators to work with the employers. Can you imagine the opportunity strategically to become more connected with our employers and really leverage their skills, their talent to help our students to figure out where their gaps are and where their knowledge already resides. So my apologies for talking too much. Going through, we have one question?
Sorry. No more? Okay.
Okay, my apologies. So I'd hope to do some brainstorming, but perhaps over the course of the next 2 days, if you come up with any ideas or you want to share some of your challenges with us, please do so. Send us your emails, and we'll put it together in a document that we'll send back out to everyone. Thank you. Thank you.